Again, I would like to welcome you all for this webinar on the program rules that is going to cover the next program period. We are happy to see so many of you showing up today, and together with my colleague Christian Bird, head of Secretariat, and myself, Christopher Wilson, we will tell you about these rules. On the technicalities today, we have our colleagues Jesper Jønsson and Annemieke Feikens.
And they're in here with us. You can't see them, but we can feel their presence.
Exactly. So the webinar is scheduled to last 1 hour, and that's of course going to cover content delivered by the two of us. And it's also going to cover time set aside for answering the questions you might have. In a few slides, you will see a pin code to Slido that we're going to use today. So if you have any questions, please put them in there. The chat in Zoom is disabled. So also if you have any technicality questions, just put them in Slido, and then my colleagues there will get back to you. But I think that was enough on the technicalities. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. So the objective for today, our objective with this webinar is to provide you with the latest knowledge that we have from the program perspective. We are going to explain to you about the program setup if you are new to the program. And then we're going to provide you with an overview of the cost categories that we are going to make use of in the future. We are, of course, not going to cover all of the program rules, but we will cover the most essential ones that would enable you to start preparing your project for the future. The written rules is not published yet. So what you will see today is the first-hand knowledge, and the written material will be published on our website as soon as it has been approved by our program preparation group. Fancy word.
Yeah, it is. It's a long word as well.
It's a long word.
Yes.
Let's go to the next slide. The agenda for today, we have divided into 4 agenda items. First of all, Christian is going to give us an introduction to the program, so how it's set up. Then we will briefly touch upon the legal framework behind our program rules. We will then dive into our program rules, and as the last thing on the agenda, we will answer the questions that you might have. Next slide, please. So as you see here on screen now, this is the login details to Slido. Please, we will leave this on for a few seconds so you have the possibility to get the information. Please go to slido.com and enter the PIN. And there will also be on the next slides a small reminder, so you, for the few of you that missed the PIN from this slide, then you will see it on the next slides. Before we get into the talk about the cost categories, Christian, could you give us a short introduction to the program?
I will do my very best to do so. I can see, I've already seen some of you who saw our webinar yesterday. There will be a little bit of repetition for those, but please bear with me and just endure while it lasts. It won't last that long. Now, we have a new geography. As you know, the UK decided to leave our group, our family. This is really sad because we had a lot of UK project people, very high quality project people from the UK. But we have what we've lost at sea, you could say, we have gained on shore, because we have more regions in Flanders. We now have the entire Flemish part of the Belgium part of our program area, and we have got all regions now in the Netherlands, so the entire country is covered by the program. Then in addition to that, we have 3 French regions who have joined our program, and we're really excited to meet them. Now, we've seen a lot of people, you guys on the screen for some time, but it would be so nice to actually meet you in person. We're very much looking forward to that. And, you know, we are painfully aware that you're probably not here because of our charms. You might be here because we have some money to offer. And if you look back at the old program and compare the budget with the new one, you will find that despite the fact that leaving the UK leaving meant, well, that we lost 40% of our budget, we have now, with the new regions and some additional funding from the existing regions, basically come up with more or less the same total budget in the next period. There's a change now in terms of grant rates. We used to have 50-50 for all projects. Now we have, for EU country partners, we have 60% of grant rate, and for Norwegian partners, 50% of grant rate. And the Norwegian decision to stay with 50% is purely a Norwegian decision. It's not something we have imposed on anyone. When we get a little bit further down the road and you have projects approved and so on, what we will be focusing a lot on is to make sure that you actually make use of the funding you have available. There's been in the past a lot of over budgeting. So if people thought they needed 1 million, they would say, right, let's take 1.2 just to be on the safe side. And that won't really work in the future. We will need to have, shall we say, reassessment of budgets as we go along, with a view to simply make sure that people have the money they need, but also that they do not have a lot of unspent funding when they close their project. Yes. Now, what kind of projects are we talking about? Now, we have two, shall we say, main sections of projects. We have small-scale projects, which are smaller projects, as given the name, 3 to 7 partners, at least 3 countries, a duration of approximately 18 months, and a total total budget of 500,000. Well, there's some not complete consensus, but there's the idea is that they shouldn't be below 200,000 in budget. But you know, if you have a good idea and it costs less, then that's absolutely fine as well. We will be using at least one simplified cost option. There's so far consensus on having staff costs plus a 40% flat rate, which will cover all other costs. There is still discussion going on about other ways of doing it, but that option will clearly be in place. Yeah. Now, we also have the regular project, or the normal projects, whatever you like to call them. We're now talking about partnerships of 8 to 15, minimum 3 countries, and that is an absolute minimum. I can't remember in my 20 years here to have seen projects where they've got away with just having 3 countries involved. But I can't rule out that it can happen. But I wouldn't go for it. I would go for having at least 4, 5, or 6, or even 7 countries involved in my project. In terms of budgets, we're talking about 2 to 6 million. That's estimations. Anything a little bit above, anything a little bit below is fine. It depends on the task at hand. We had a question yesterday on this, you know, what if I have an enormous budget of, say, 20 million or so? Well, there's nothing stopping you from submitting an application with that, but it really needs to be good in order to take up that much funding. So I would go for these sort of guidelines, and because that's what they're intended for, as guidelines. Yes. Then on the admin, you know, who are we, and who are you getting involved with as you go along? Now, Christoph and I, Jesper and Amika here, we belong to the Joint Secretariat, We are located in the middle of nowhere in Viborg, Denmark. And what we normally do is that we basically we implement the project. We are facilitators, you could say, for delivering the project. We know that the actual work is being done on project level, but we are here to make sure that people, the projects report as they should, that they do not do anything absolutely mad, and they stayed out of jail, basically. So we're here to make sure that things work, and that's what you can think of us as caretakers, basically. Then we have our politicians. That's the monitoring committee. They monitor the overall implementation of the program, and they select projects for support. Now, the monitoring committee will be people mainly from the national and regional level, and there will be a delegation from each country. So there will be, how much will there be? About 30 people, something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah, and the new thing about the new program is that compared to the olden days, we do not have a steering committee. In the olden days, we had a steering committee who only did selection of projects for support. We've decided to simplify things and just have it all in a monitoring committee, which is similar to what you will find in a lot of other programs. So we are quite excited to see how this is all going to work out in practice.
I think it's perhaps also, if I can just add a word to this, in terms of the division of labor when it comes to applications, that when you submit it to the program, we will do the assessment of it. So we will give our recommendation to the monitoring committee. And then, as Christian also said, the actual selection will be carried out by the monitoring committee.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, because sometimes people have the idea that we decide which project gets approved. We don't. We make an assessment of them. And every time we've had in the olden days, a steering committee meeting, a meeting where decisions are made on projects, there's always once or twice that we get overruled. And that's how it should be, because we are doing a technical assessment and the countries decide what they actually want for their money.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Christian. So that was the brief introduction to our program and how it's set up. We have learned about the type of projects that we are going to make use of, the budget framework that we have available. And before we get to the cost categories, Christian, you have promised me to take me a tour through the regulations, because as with all things, there is a point of departure for all rules. Christian, if you could put a few words on this.
I will do my very best. He actually knows them already, just in case you weren't out. But we do have the Common Provision Regulations. That's our Bible, basically, giving the overall view on everything we need to adhere to, we and you. And then there is the ERDF regulation, which is basically in more detail describing the ins and outs of the project administration. And then there's the Interreg regulation, which is aiming specifically on for us, and it is absolutely key to implementing projects. That's the overall framework that we're operating with. But there's another layer to this, and because there's a hierarchy of rules, and you will sometimes have to see the discussion of what comes first, national rules or program rules or EU rules. And the hierarchy of rules is actually quite simple. EU rules always comes first. Whatever we do, we have to be in line with them. A couple of program periods ago, there had been a lot of confusion. What about national rules and program rules? So a couple of, I think it was firmly introduced at the last program period. It was clearly defined that program rules would then come before national rules. And only if national rules, that if there wasn't any program rules, the national rules would take over. So strictly speaking, we need to all to be in line with the EU rules. Then comes the program rules, and the program rules are the ones that Christopher will be talking about in a minute, in terms of our fact sheets and other sources of regulation. And then only when that is exhausted, the national rules come in. You will still find from time to time people who will argue that that's not the case, but it is the case. And that's simply because they haven't done their homework, if they still claim that. It's been in place for more than 10 years now, and it's still going to be like that. So just to avoid any misunderstandings on that. Now, the EU rules are quite broad. And when you get to the program rules, that's where you put more flesh and blood on it. And that also means that we can, shall we say, make our rules fit to the specific conditions of our program. And we do that. But it also means that you will sometimes find varieties between the programs. You will find that one rule, maybe in the Northwest Europe program, is slightly different in our program, and vice versa. And there are many different reasons for it, but it's something you need to be aware of. So if you know the EU, the Baltic Sea rules or the Northwest Europe rules by heart, then it doesn't mean that you don't have to actually read ours, because there might be there will be some minor differences, not big things, but smaller things that are nevertheless important to know, so that you do not get into trouble. That's basically a good advice on that.
And perhaps just adding to this, also an advice to our community that has already been established during the current program period, that just because you know the rules of the 5B program period, you should still read the rules of the next program period, just to avoid any misunderstandings.
We can say, however, it'll be easy because the changes are not that big. So, but please do anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the next part on the agenda, the program rules. When you say it like this, it sounds like a big thing, and it is a big thing, but it's not more complex than it's easy to follow.
And it is a big thing. I just need to say, because we've been working our socks off on it for a long time.
I completely agree. But in terms of the on the complexity of it, it's something that we can all understand.
That's true.
And
that is true.
Hopefully easier apply. As you can see on the slide now, just a reminder to Slido, just that if you have any questions or if something arises in terms of questions during the next intervention, please just submit your question, and perhaps we will come up with a clever answer.
You can't rule that out.
No, but no guarantees made.
No.
So just to a short introduction to the fact sheets. So the program rules are decided and implemented by the Program Monitoring Committee. And what are the fact sheets, and hereby also the program rules? Well, they are the common understanding amongst the participating countries for how an article in a regulation should be interpreted in the context of our program. The fact sheets, they also outline the eligible cost and cost category that can fund activities, or where you can fund activities in our program.
Maybe we should also mention in this context that, they are not cast in stone. If we see something that doesn't work, or if suddenly new regulation comes into place as we go along, then we will modify them. And you would actually see in the top part of each fact sheet, you will see which version you are now talking about. Just an important piece of information that to bear in mind.
Yeah, absolutely right. Next slide, please. Thank you. In terms of cost categories, and when I say cost categories, some of you that have been used to the program, you might think, what is that now all about? But then when you glance through the cost categories, you would actually be reminded that, it looks very much identical to the budget lines of the 5B program period. And you are right. So more or less the same thing, new terminology. So we can either call them budget lines or cost categories, and we will not be offended of however you choose to name them. The cost categories that we're going to apply in the program period ahead is staff cost, it's office administration, it's travel and accommodation, it's external expertise and services, then it's equipment and infrastructure and works. And as you can see from the headings here, that there have been some changes to what can be included under which budget line.
But if you think there are many of them, you should see how it was in the past. We used to have 13 different cost categories or budget lines. So it's a lot of progress has been made to make it as simple as possible for all of you.
Exactly. And adding to that, I even think we had some sub budget lines just to make it a bit more simple.
Yeah.
As Christian was also pointing out when he taught us through the various types of projects, then we have the two types of projects, regular projects versus small scale projects. And for the next intervention, if you are looking into the concept of small scale projects, you should pay really good attention to staff cost as it looks right now, because the other cost categories will be, and let's see how this ends, but currently the other cost categories will be covered by a 40% flat rate, as also indicated by Christian. If you are considering going for a regular project, then you will apply all of the cost categories that you see on screen now. Let's move on. In terms of staff costs, then of course what we do when we prepare a new program is that we look into what has our experience been with a certain topic. We are looking into the regulations, what is new in terms of the regulations, what are the needs from the member states, and also what are the needs from our beneficiaries. And clearly we have seen a tendency that it has been to some extent complicated to calculate an adequate hourly rate in the previous program period, or the 5B program period. And because the regulation allows a program to more narrowly define program rules, we have in our program decided not to go with a setup where you are supposed to calculate an hourly rate, meaning that we will move from 4 options of handling staff costs to now only applying 3 options. The option at hand is that you can, if you're working on a project, you can either work full-time on the project, meaning that all of your salary costs or employer gross costs are linked to the project. It can also be that you're working on a project with a fixed percentage that, of course, can range somewhere in between 0 and 100%. And then, of course, we also allow for staff that are employed by the hour to be working on a project. The thing about staff being employed by the hour means that there's an explicit hourly rate stated in the employment contract. So we have removed the possibility of calculating the hourly rate in the project when you calculate how much staff cost that you have put in. But at the same time, the benefit for you and for us is that we, by doing so, have reduced the risk of making mistakes.
And that last bit, the one that we removed, is simply the major source of errors in the old program.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sorry.
There's a small aber dabei here, and that is that if you are from Flanders, there will be special rules applying to you, covering both partners located in Flanders, but also in the rest of the Belgian regions. So whatever I've told you about staff cost now, please adhere to the specific fact sheet covering Flanders.
Mm. And also, if I can, there's been some discussions at times where, you know, some people in parts of Belgium say, yeah, but we're not Flanders, so we're going to make use of the program rules, and that doesn't really work. It's if you're from Flanders and Belgium in general, then you go with the rules specifically made for Flanders and Belgium. That's basically just to avoid any misunderstandings.
Yeah, thanks so much. Let's move to the next slide. And this is my mantra, and I called it the easiest rule in the previous program period, and I will maintain that position, saying for the cost category office administration, this is by far the easiest rule. It's 15% of all staff costs, meaning that when you put your application together, whatever you put in as staff cost or a staff budget, you will get a budget equivalent of 15% of that. And when you're going to report during implementation of a project, then 15% will be added to all verified staff costs that you report to us.
So you don't actually have to do any calculation yourself.
No,
the system does it for you.
Yeah.
You know, it's difficult to get that wrong, isn't it?
It is.
You need to really.
Where we have to be careful is that this 15% flat rate is going to cover all indirect costs.
That is true.
And what does that mean? It means that we, of course, have a fact sheet on it. And the fact sheet clearly lists the costs that will be included on this cost category. That is cost for office rent. It's regular office supplies, equipment. It's archiving, it's maintenance, and so forth. The key here is that it's covering all of the indirect costs that is being part of your project activities. And as you can see as the last bullet point on this slide, no direct documentation is needed. What is it then I mean with no direct documentation is needed? Well, of course, you should still document that you have incurred staff costs, and the documentation for your staff cost is the basis for the verified 15%. Do you have anything to add on this, Christian?
No, I have this nagging feeling there was something, but I've forgotten it for the moment. But let's see if we go back to it during the questions.
Exactly. So let's move on. We have the cost category travel and accommodation. And as you can see, it's only valid for members of staff. Does that mean that you can only cover travel expenses for members of staff? No, it does not. If you have external experts working on your project activities, that could also be if you invite a speaker to a conference, for example, then of course you can cover those expenses. You just need to include them under another cost category, external expertise and services. For travel and accommodation, as I said, only valid for members of staff, and it is limited to travel expenditures, meals, accommodation, and travel allowance in general.
Yeah, it's quite simple.
Easy peasy.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's move on to external expertise and services. I'm going on a limb now, Christian, but I will guarantee you that all of our projects, they will make use of this budget line, external expertise and services.
I would assume so, because they need to communicate, for example.
They need to communicate. Yeah. And a lot of you will perhaps also be needing external experts for doing communication, for example, as Christian said. It could be project management. It could be production of leaflets, or yeah, take your pick. The key here is to remember when and how to perform procurement, and to do it proper and adequate. That is the key about external expertise and services.
Can I just, before we leave this this slide, this is for those of you who've been working with European projects for many years, you will have seen it many times. But I always find it so amusing. Nowadays, it's no longer called first level control. It's now being called controller costs. That's something you do whenever you have a well-defined word in the world of Interact, you change it, just to make sure that people are on their toes and don't get complacent. So if you think you know a good and clear term, then it's quite likely that it'll be changed in terms of its name. And now, first level control is no longer called first level control, it's called controller costs. We will bear with you when you misuse the word, and when we hope that you will do the same when we misuse the word, because we will do that clearly.
I'm pretty sure that I have already used terms covering both partners and beneficiaries.
Oh yeah, that's another
even
one.
though that they mean this exact same thing.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next cost category, equipment. Equipment costs can be essential for the delivery of project activities. And that could, for example, be tools, it could be other forms of devices, IT hardware and software, and vehicles and other costs. The key here is that you do not include, for example, cost for a laptop that is used for daily management of the project, because that is already covered by the cost category of administration. I think it will be relatively easy for everybody to know what can be included and what cannot.
Mm.
And of course, we also very much accommodate that you can not only buy new equipment, but also second-hand purchases.
Mm.
In this context, you should, however, just be aware of the national standard and rules for depreciation versus full cost reporting.
Yes.
And again, remember proper and adequate procurement. It's really, really key.
I remember, Christopher, there used to be a rule, but maybe it's gone now. There used to be a rule where, if you'd actually already bought would typically be some kind of equipment in a laboratory, and you'd already sort of bought it with part financing from the EU.
Yeah.
Then what are the rules then? Are they then still eligible for funding in the if you buy it as a used equipment?
The thing is, Christian, it's a bit of a tricky topic, because when we are touching upon the EU funding question, then we can only fund activities once, meaning that if one activity and if a good, for example, have already received support from the EU, the same good cannot receive support a second time. Now, however, it's not always a black and white story, and I think we would have to touch that more.
But maybe actually, I was teasing my colleague here a little bit because it is a bloody difficult question. But the thing is, it just goes to show that things can sometimes be a little bit tricky, and there's nothing wrong with not knowing the answer right away. So if you have sort of areas where you think, I have no idea how this is going to work in practice, then do ask for advice. Do ask for advice either by your controller or from the secretariat, your project advisor. I think that's always a good idea. Better do that, and maybe they get a little bit tired if you'd ask the same question many times, but sort that. Just go for it, and make sure it's better that you ask once too many and make sure you don't get into trouble than it is to think you're right and then you end up in tears. That would be a very sad thing, I think.
I completely agree, Christian. Especially the part on ending up in tears. That's never a pleasant experience.
Terrible, yeah.
And also, you might ask yourself, but are you experts on all various topics? And indeed, we are not. But we always know people that are experts on various fields, and we have quite a broad network in the member states also. So we can always find the right person to answer your question.
And we get a lot of the difficult ones. We don't get a lot of the easy ones. So we are trained in that.
Let's move on to the final cost category that we apply, and that is infrastructure and works. It will be very few projects, at least that's our expectations, that will make use of this cost category. As you can see, I have included all of the costs that will be that can be included on this cost category, So it's limited to building permits and materials. It's limited to labor costs linked to the construction of the infrastructure item. It's linked to purchase of land or other specialized interventions. So when we talk about infrastructure in this program period, we do in fact mean infrastructure. It's a physical construction, for example. And again, and I know I keep repeating myself on this, but remember the procurement. It's extremely important. I have talked a lot about procurement, so now you probably need to know why. And the thing is, you have to consider 4 situations when, first of all, when you plan your project. In the future, you will be asked already at application stage to at least indicate what type of procurement that you will foresee for various cost items. You have to consider 4 situations. So are they good? We're talking about the contract. Is that above EU threshold? Is it above national organization thresholds? Is it above program threshold, or is it below the program threshold? In terms of the EU thresholds, it's very easy. Not that it can give you the amounts here, but there are 2 directives that also will be outlined in our fact sheet that clearly indicates the EU thresholds. So everything about EU threshold, that's EU-wide tender. Everybody should be able, if they want to, of course, to submit a bid on that contract. Above national thresholds, you already know what are your national organization thresholds. If you do not know it, I'm pretty sure all of you know who to contact or where you can find the information. The program threshold currently is at 5,000 euros excluding VAT. However, it's not a done deal. Perhaps that threshold will change. Perhaps it will remain the same. We are still exploring that with our participating countries.
I think it's important also because you will be in doubt when you do procurement. Otherwise, you would be the only person in the whole world who wouldn't be in doubt. So when you ask for advice, sort of be aware that, for example, asking a lawyer with expertise in EU tendering will not necessarily make you wiser. It will make your pocket more empty, clearly, but it will not necessarily give you the answer. And if you can be absolutely sure, if you ask another one the following day, you'll get another reply. But I think the invoice will be the same. But just be aware, use your own judgment also in this, and ask around before you go to the lawyer. I think that's good advice.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Christian. And also just to put a final remark on the program threshold, you might find that it's too ambitious to have a program threshold and consider that it's a enormous task. We're doing a tender on this. What we ask in terms of the program rules is that if you are above the program threshold but below the national thresholds, then simply you need to ask 3 suppliers, if possible, of course, for a bid on the contract that you foresee. Nothing more.
And when you then think, right, okay, but I know who's going to get this contract because there's only one person in the whole world, and he's my cousin, who can do this particular task, then do it anyway. Document that you have actually carried out the exercise. You only got one offer. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you cannot document that you actually tested the market, then you're in trouble. And that's the whole purpose of the exercise. You need to test the market for the good bid, if you like.
And a lot of you is probably laughing about the comment about we could only find one guy, but believe me, we have heard that explanation in the past as well. Yes. Let's move on to the next slide. A lot of you will probably also ask the question, what about existing framework contracts? Can we still make use of those? And of course you can, as long as they follow the program rules. So if they fulfill our requirements, and if they allow your project activity to also be covered by this framework contract, of course, you can make use of the contract. And trading between partners, that's also a topic that we quite often get. And of course, it's allowed to exchange services between partners on two conditions. First of all, it must not distort competition, and second of all, it should be at a non-profit. What would you say, Christian? Basis, exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much. So on a real cost basis. And just a final remark, remember, as Christian also indicated in the previous slide, the documentation for the entire process, how you have received the bids, how you have explained the tender in itself, and also how you have assessed and granted the contract. That is documentation that you should remember to save.
And this thing about procurement, in the olden days, it was rare that the second level controllers would really dive into it because they didn't really know it either. But that has changed. They may not know it still, but they dive into it, and so it's important that you actually have it documented.
And it's not difficult to do proper procurement.
No.
The tricky part here can be to figure out exactly what are the requirements. But when you have figured out the requirements, and that is also something we can assist you with, then it's relatively straightforward. Of course, it takes time, but everything takes time.
Yes, and strictly speaking, you're most likely not doing anything in terms of the documentation that you wouldn't do anyway.
Yeah. I agree. Let's move on. And the final slide in this intervention is regarding exchange rates. And I know it's a bit premature for some of you in terms of we are only talking about preparing projects, but it's key for me to just stress what our program rules are on this. And exchange of cost, remember, as a program, we apply the euro as our currency. And it's only if you operate a non-euro bank account that you at all should consider converting any expenditures when you get to reporting. And it's very simple. In our fact sheet, we will include a link to the official conversion rate that the Commission has issued. They do that once as an average of the previous month. And the conversion should take place, if you are eligible for conversion, of course, should take place once the expenditure is forwarded to your controller for verification. That's actually covering our cost categories.
Yeah, it is.
And if we move to the next slide, then now it is time for questions and hopefully also some answers.
Yeah.
So if we could get the Slido on screen and see what we have of.
And we will do our very best to answer all your questions. And if we can't answer them, we will pretend we can.
That's not true.
No.
Great.
I just need to. There it is. Right. With the focus on not over budgeting, will you set out milestones and financial targets for each project, which could lead to a budget reduction if not met? That is actually the idea. So we have not finally decided on how we're going to do it, but we will have to do something along those lines.
And perhaps what we could, as a point of departure, when we talk about financial targets, so who would set these targets? And we will most likely apply the knowledge that you provide to us. So in the application form, you are giving us a spending plan, an overview of when do you expect to make use of the budget that you are requesting. So that could be our point of departure for the financial targets.
Yeah.
And please, if you have any questions, put them in Slido.
Yeah.
Will there be a notification when a new version of the rules is available?
Well, it depends a little bit, because often the changes are very, very small, and they don't really warrant a sort of big sort of song and dance about it. But you will always be able to, if there's something really important, we'll make a news story about it on our website. But if it's, shall we say, day-to-day modifications, we would just have a look in the beginning on the top part of each fact sheet. You will see which version we're talking about and when it's valid to and from. And if you go to our website, every time you want to make use of a fact sheet, then you can indeed see the latest version of the fact sheets.
Indeed, and that is the type of program we are. We of course always in close contact with our projects, meaning that if there are essential changes, you will also hear it from your project advisors. Yeah. Can we get the next question?
And also maybe while we're at this, if you can see something in some of the fact sheets that you think this absolutely doesn't work, we might not know it, so please tell us. So it would be really nice, because if something is completely incomprehensible, I don't understand a word what they're saying in this bloody secretariat. So rather than being angry, that's fine for a while, but it gets tiresome in the long run. So why don't you just talk to us? Because we are relatively nice to talk to, many of us. Yeah. So yeah. So only externals procured before the start of the project with an hourly rate in Bertering contract can be called staff.
No, I think we're mixing two concepts here. So first of all, we're talking about external to the organization. And of course, they should be procured, but they should not be procured before you have started operating a project, unless they're part of a framework contract. And if we're talking about staff, it's staff already employed at the partner organization. Perhaps I'm not getting the question right, but at least that's my interpretation.
Yeah. Do I understand correctly that staff costs are calculated by taking the actual yearly cost as mentioned in the staff contract? Is that including social costs?
Yes, that is indeed including social cost. And that's also something that you'll be able to see from our fact sheet. We are quite explicit about what is entailed in the gross employer cost.
You have to, if you think of it sort of from a logical perspective, the idea is that we will cover 60% of the cost that you actually have for having that particular person employed. That's basically it.
Exactly.
So and the social cost is part of the cost. It's not so that you have social costs and then you don't have to pay them. You have to pay them.
Yeah.
So it's a cost of having that particular person employed.
Exactly.
It is indeed. We just showed it on the screen.
Yeah. So the question was the 5,000 euro rule, if that is still in place, and so far it is.
Yeah.
Perhaps it will change.
Yeah.
Perhaps it won't.
We basically the discussion is going in the direction of increasing it to a higher amount, but there's no complete consensus on that in the member states.
Will small-scale projects also be able to cover preparation costs in their budget, similar to normal projects? That will not be the case. Small-scale projects, they are not eligible for preparation costs.
And the idea is, of course, that the preparation of them should be less comprehensive than for a big project.
Exactly. When should the depreciation of equipment be budgeted versus full purchase cost? Well, to be cheeky, I would like to send it back to the person that have asked the question, because it's hard for us to know, first of all, which country you're from, and also what are the equipment and the national rules that applies in terms of depreciation rules. So if you have any concrete questions when you are budgeting for a project, I would suggest that you seek advice on the rules that applies to you in your member state. Do you have anything to add, Christian?
No, I think that's absolutely fair.
is non-deductible VAT eligible for funding? That is indeed an eligible expenditure.
Mm. And that's something which is new to the new program.
Can you select 3 companies for 3 offers yourself, or does this have to be public?
Well, you can select them yourself, but it's a good idea that it's not sort of close family members, all of them. It's a good idea that you can sort of at least give an idea that you have honestly tried to cover the market.
Infrastructure seems to be mostly ineligible. Is that correct?
Not necessarily.
No, I think that was then a misunderstanding. First of all, infrastructure is an eligible cost in our program. However, the type of projects that we plan for, and that's also something that you can see from the preview that we have available on our website in terms of the 4 priorities we are currently working with, doesn't really encompass many projects working with infrastructure.
But you could have, for example, a project where it's about making sort of an area climate proof, basically. And you could have a demonstration project showing a particular technique or whatever to do that particular thing. And that this would be infrastructure, clearly, but it would also be eligible. So it depends a little bit. We're not talking about infrastructure in terms of building a road to somewhere. But if it's relevant and it fits the project, then that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
It's just not that common, you could say.
Will you give advances to small partners or all to help with cash flow?
Well, the thing is, we can't do that. Or we are only allowed to reimburse costs that you have actually incurred. That's the whole part of it. And I know that some will find it deeply unfair, but I can tell you that the countries that have made these rules have painful experiences with people, shall we say, not necessarily running away with the money, but not being particularly helpful in delivering once the advance has been paid. And I'm not saying that this is the case here, but that's the reason why the rules are quite strict on that. We fully understand the question, but we can't help you on that.
We only work with the reimbursing costs.
Yeah.
Can we include a further unforeseen staff or travel cost in the admin flat rate? My advice would be, I think now we're talking about a situation where we have been approved as a project and we have started implementing.
Yeah.
My advice would be that, of course, you should still include the cost on the relevant within the relevant cost categories, and if changes are needed to your partner budget, that's something that we can assist you with. And to be honest, changing a partner budget, that is just reflecting reality. And reality is that a project will change to some extent also during implementation.
Yeah, we fully understand if you are in day 0, you cannot know what's going to happen in 3 years' time. Well, you have an idea, but you cannot at all foresee if it's actually going to happen. Just think of Corona, what changes that made to all of our lives. So it's we're fully aware of that, and that's why keep in touch with us, and we will see whatever we can do to help.
Could you go over the procurement slide again and maybe give example for each of the 4 cases? That's not something that we will do now, but clearly we can make, I will take this advice with us further in preparing the new program. And what we could do is that we often create a frequently asked questions section on our website. And then this, of course, could be something that could serve as examples.
Yeah.
What time span do you foresee between the day we spend on an activity and the day we get the EU financing back? So how long is it from a cost is incurred to that we actually reimburse it?
Well, that's a movable feast, isn't it? Because it depends. Well, we're not paying you until you report to us, of course. And sometimes it could take a long time from the time people actually do the activity until they actually report. So that part of it is very much on your part of the playing field. But we do have what's it called? We have a deadline that we need to comply with in terms of processing your reports and paying you.
Exactly. So as soon as you have submitted a report to us, we can be very clear on how long it will take before you receive your reimbursement. And we have 80 days. Per the regulation, we have 80 days to process your payment, meaning that if there are no follow-ups needed, no unanswered questions, then your project will be reimbursed within 80 days. I can see from my colleague that the time is about to be up. So what we will do is that we will take all of the questions that we have not answered here, and then we will provide written feedback and post that on our website.
And also the same goes for our slides. They will be made available for you by our website.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have a couple of minutes left, and Christian, I'm considering if you could just
take you through quite quickly the last, shall we say, the timeline, and be aware this is a movable feast. It can change, and it will probably also change, but this is the future as we see it at the moment. Now we have just started with these webinars, the soft launch, basically making people ready to start working on their applications. We've been doing these webinars. We will in December open the call 1, which means that we will also open the OMS, which is the online monitoring system where you sort of work on your project. We will close call 1 in the spring of 22, and we expect to have the first small-scale projects approved by June 22. This is a small-scale project, and it would be expressions of interest, which is stage 1 if you have a big regular project. Now, you can also in the call 1, you can and that's only in call 1. You can submit a full application as an application and skip, shall we say, the step 1 of the application process. You can do that for call 1 only. In terms of, but it doesn't stop you from being able to submit expressions of interest. Stage 1, and if you don't think you're particularly ready to submit a full application, then submit that as part of the small scale call. If you have, I'm babbling now. If you have a full regular project application, that will be decided on in September 22.
That wasn't babbling.
Do you think so?
No, that was very precise.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Christian, for taking us through the future. And just to summarize what we have talked about today, So first of all, it's important that you read and understand the program rules before you prepare your project. We know that some rules are more complex than others. However, they are all extremely important. The fact sheets are not online yet, but as soon as they are ready, we will post them, and clearly they will be made available before call one opens. That's a given fact. And then finally, we are looking very much forward to receiving all of your project proposals. And that's it from us. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Are we muted?